last section there, only the Aztecs and of course Mesoamerican died when the Spanish left our mark. How come it didn't work the other way as well? Because obviously the native population. Pardon? Yeah, that's
Mostly, there's some argument that what did happen, we know for sure that there is one of these series of treponemes, this syphilis business, that is non-venereal but was carried back to Europe because venereal syphilis really takes off after some of the first Spanish returned to the Old World. And it used to be thought that was the exchange, the Columbian exchange. Europe brought this stuff over, typhus, typhoid, it wasn't known, influenza, smallpox, and in return, at least the major thing was venereal syphilis. Well, it doesn't seem that way anymore. It seems like what did travel, though, was another form of treponeme that didn't exist in the Old World, and then that probably very easily moved into syphilis. And part of the reason is, I'll talk more about that with you PowerPoint, but is that yaws is more of a tropical disease, that's a skin disease primarily, and we have a particular strain of yaws just recently coming out of Venezuela area off the Caribbean Islands, I think, that molecularly looks like the closest thing we have to venereal syphilis and not be venereal syphilis. So the thought now is that it was something like this yaws that when it traveled into a temperate zone, okay, got this? When it moves from tropical skin, it way of adapting in temperate zone to sweating and people wearing clothes now, so they can't rub and get contact, that it moved into a moist, hot, warm, constant body temperature area, which is what the genitals, and it transmuted itself then into what we know as venereal syphilis. So that is one of the more recent kind of things. And so this goes on here. Remember, most of the Spanish had gone through a milder, variola minor, endemic, which gave them lifelong immunity. And most of the Spanish was made up of that. As both of you said, this so, and Ian mentioned also, in England, this so demoralized survivors felt that the Spanish had this divine protection. They were dying all alongside them, the Spanish right around, working with them. And of course this aided the conversion to Christianity and made hope and other kinds of things. And it so broke down the society, not only by death, but all the hierarchy. Don't forget, most of the leaders of the core of leaders of Aztec all died.
Right.
And their soldiers died left and right. So when Cortez comes in with 600 people and a few horses and a few heavy guns, of which then was reported, because they'd never seen the horse, even though the horse originated in the New World, different form, three-year-old, became the more modern horse in the Old World, Asia, and traveled over to Europe. We're talking 10, 15,000 years ago. But they'd never seen that. So as this word got ahead to Moctezuma, he was always a little bit query anyway, and wondered, he'd see his soothsayers of who this is. Well, in their myths, they have different kinds of deities, semi-deities. Quetzalcoatl is one that supposedly at some time will come back, and he'll come on the sea on a raft of serpents. And it will be him. So they tied this in over time because this guy was pretty suspicious. But this was maybe some form of Quetzalcoatl coming back. So there was that holding back. But his general said, "You kidding? Let's get these guys." But it was already too late. So, but what he established was exactly what Mario said. Cortez very sharp. He saw right away where the Aztecs ruled by terror also. And he took some of their enemies, and the enemies saw that, well, this might be something good to align to. So neighbors to the Aztecs, called the Tlaxcalans, signed on with the Spanish. So now we got something going about 600-700 people to these allies that number about 100,000 warriors. Tlaxcalans and others that he picked up along the way. Part of what Mario said. So that allows them to start bridging the gap. And then he got kicked out, however, the very first step, and as some of you know, then in 1521 he came back with more folks, but by that time, already smallpox and others, there wasn't much to defend or to fight.
Yeah.
There were just dead people all over the place when they came down those causeways with the horses and guns, and there wasn't much left. So again, we've seen this, like fire spread north and traveling trade routes.
Just real quickly, and also in South America, for example, in the Incas, part of their mythology, they had a deity figure that had lighter skin, and the bearded, and also lighter eyes, and that matched one of the, I don't know if it was, I think it was De Soto or Pizarro, I don't remember, one of the, but when I was in the museums in Lima, they talked about that. So, and I don't remember who it was, that some famous author that said, you know, you live and die by what you believe. And, you know, and that goes to mythology. I mean, that's not to denigrate any belief of anybody, but if you believe in something and then you go to defend it, you get, I mean, in the case of the Incas and the Aztecs, you can see there that their mythology came back to
work against them.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me then finish this today by addressing one other thing I said mentioned earlier, the failure to recapture populations, especially in North America. It was just killed off and pushed off land and ways of living, and all that kept being pushed out of it. But in Mesoamerica, which I know much more intimately, these Indians were put into incredible kinds of work conditions where they were fed hardly at all, and in fact, in South America, in the tin mines, silver mines, and hardly given any food but given coca, which is an alkaloid, stimulates the red blood cell production and energy form, but just worked to death. So with no more elders around, dispirited hopelessness, domination, and work to death hours can account for as much death in some historians' views as probably much of the infectious pathogens that struck them and continued over a period of time, and particularly was so virulent because, one, they were a virgin population. Second, because they had poor nutrition in the subsequent cases. Among the Aztecs, I mean, indigenously, they were pretty well fed, put it that way. But, so that's the deal. Let me just quote on something I copied out of one of my other books. This is the testimony of Leciendo Francisco Sainos, who was appointed the Royal Consul of the Indies and enlightened. He was an enlightened 16th century, one of the more Spanish observers. This is a paragraph here. And it is certain that from the day that Hernando Cortés, the Marquis de Valle, entered this land, in the 7 years more or less that he conquered and governed it, the natives suffered many deaths and many terrible dealings. Robberies and oppressions were inflicted on them, taking advantage of their persons and their lands without order, weight, or measure. People diminished in great number as much due to excessive taxes and mistreatment as to illness and smallpox, such that now a very great and noble fraction of the people are gone, especially in the hot country. One of the few Spanish crown employees to have been down on record to what he looked over all these records that, you know, people submitted, that Cortés had to submit letters and stuff of that back too, and as did all the encomienda leaders, latifundios, in early on to get a land grant from the crown. Peace.
Okay, so what's due then for next?
What's due next time is the influenza.
Influenza. Okay.
In the handout.
The print.
It's in the handout.
Okay.
And of course,
and then
free to.
Okay. And then what are we doing? Chapters 3 or 4 in this one? No. So we're done then.
We're done.
Okay.
That's the way it goes, and I'm glad it worked out that way. You didn't buy the book for